Before I get into lessons learned and all that, passport privilege is real. I was traveling to Glasgow a few months ago, and there was a long line snaking out of the entryway, but the line for US and Canada was conspicuously shorter, and I remembered that I can actually walk through that line now. For such privileges, I'm grateful. So I'm an unabashed admirer of the West, the exceptionalism, the cultural assimilation, the superior institutional standards, and the meritocracy. So it gives me no pleasure to note the fact that there is a rapid deterioration of the West. And almost all of this is entirely self inflicted. And I feel powerless, especially when so many have no awareness of it. So I'm going to list a few things in no particular order of importance. But number one is the rejection of all the things that make the West great. The US is still more religious relative to other countries in the West that have long since abandoned any vestiges of their faith. Particularly in England, this is the faith that gave them their judicial system, their identity, and a conscientious application of their faith, often at very great cost. For example, the historian Tom Holland, he says it well in his best-selling book, Dominion. People in the West, even those who may imagine that they have emancipated themselves from Christian belief, in fact, are shot through with Christian assumptions about almost everything. All of us in the West are a goldfish, and the water that we swim in is Christianity, by which I don't necessarily mean the confessional form of the faith, but rather considered as an entire civilization. Having discarded and now openly hostile to the faith, citizens' natural spiritual impulses are now recklessly misdirected into nihilistic and often mutilating activism. Second, the no work is mean attitude. I come from a highly classist society. Whenever I used to travel to the West, I was often moved by the fact that all jobs are rendered equal dignity. And I have always thought that this actually comes from a foundational belief and understanding that man is created in the image of God. Sometimes the weight of this can truly be appreciated in its absence. Listen, I loved my life in Mumbai. I miss the hustle and the hospitality of its people. But markers of distinct socioeconomic differentiation, they just ran across society. It was unspoken in many occurrences, it was overt in others, but there was no missing it. There were parallel societal clusters. They mingled, but did not merge. Number three, the inability to hash out differences. Now, this one is a bit of a head scratcher. I have always admired public discourse in the West, and I viewed the rancorous interaction, even hair splitting discussions over policy differences, as proof of a transparent society that greatly valued individual liberties, consent of the governed, and a robust commitment to free speech. Increasingly, however, even in my interactions with highly accomplished men and women, they should have known better. They should have been steeped in these values, but they prefer confining themselves to their own in groups. They will tolerate no threat to their worldview, and they will retreat at the first sign of conflict. Instead of engaging with another viewpoint, being open to conviction, even inviting opportunities for growth through discussion with a variety of viewpoints. And sadly, professing Christians have not exemplified the standard. They have a rich culture of critical thinking that is encouraged in the Bible. Nowhere was this more obvious than many professing Christians who were in public health and who should have known better, who should have encouraged engaging with viewpoints that dissented, instead showed no sympathy whatsoever and shut down criticism altogether. Very disappointing. Number four, the rise in lawlessness. Growing up in Mumbai, no matter where I went within the city or outside the city, my neck was always on a swivel. And so the times that I truly let my guard down were during my travels to the US. I could just look straight ahead. I did not need to be scanning all directions all the time. Women here have no idea how fortunate they are. They come and go as they please, and they have no sense of the pit in the stomach that women in Mumbai feel, that I felt certainly, when you have to push past these lecherous hordes, often with a very obscene gaze. When defund the police spread in the West, when it came to Toronto, it was a chilling feeling for me. And each time I had to walk past needles and syringes on the sidewalks or read about shuttered stores, bus shelters taken over by homeless encampments, the alarming rise of suicidality, the pro Hamas Intifada protesters blocking traffic, even on highways, and violent offenders who were released after 49 strikes. I just felt what can only be described as a soul sickness because I knew I was looking on at a destruction of the last standing bastion. Number five, the reek of death. Perhaps this can be best symbolized by the wafting smell of weed, especially as you drive downtown. Medical assistance in dying, euphemistically known as MAID, in Canada, according to an October 2023 Health Canada report, constituted 4.1% of all deaths in Canada, having grown 30% over the previous year. The law was considering expansion to mental illness, even if it was a sole condition. The Canadian national anthem enjoins God to keep our land glorious and free. How can it do so? This is a culture of degrowth, decline, and death. Number six, and lastly, the veneer of relationships. A lot has been said about the loss of friendships, the increase in loneliness, perhaps all exacerbated by our perpetually online presence. I went from doing life in a community where people just dropped in, uninvited, because they were in the area, even if they weren't. They made it their business to know all about yours. Going from that to a barren formality, even niceness was a bit of an adjustment. Now, don't get me wrong, I have met genuinely well meaning and compassionate people here, and I'm so grateful for the kindness of strangers. That made my adjustment and practically overnight transition into a new society relatively easy and so worthwhile. So, even with all of these criticisms, I am holding out hope. I want and hope that men and women will be more conscientious, men more chivalrous, and will have the ability to hold difficult and uncomfortable conversations in person and will step up to the plate when offered a challenge. There is a beautiful biblical verse that says, "One day swords will be beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. And until that day arrives, may the West be salt and light, like a city set on a hill, and be a respite in the storm."